We'll go ahead and get this started here. Hello,
Cool,
everyone.
cool.
Hey, we're glad to see you here today, and thank you for joining us. I'm Keith. I'm here today with Fawn. I don't know if he's on my left or my right, depending on what your camera is. This is episode 2 in our monthly series of discussing command and control, or otherwise known by the acronym C2 or CNC. And today's discussion is about data jitter, what it is and why we care about it. Fawn will show you an example of its usage using an open source C2 framework called Merlin. And we want this to be an open interactive format, which includes all of you. So we can stop and start at any time, and we welcome your questions, comments in Discord. I'll be monitoring that as best as I can and jump in and answer any of the questions you have. So we welcome all of that. So that's why we want to make this a little different
Yeah,
because yes, we have a presentation. Yes, Fawn put together some awesome slides for us to go through the information. But at the same time, we want it to involve you as well. So if you have any questions, throw them in Discord. We're not using Zoom for chat or Q&A. So please don't put anything in Zoom because we don't want to miss your questions. If you haven't already joined our Threat Hunter Community Discord channel, there is a link to it in Zoom under the Resources tab. If you go into Resources, you'll find a link for our Discord channel there. So you're welcome to join there. So we also want to let you know this is a safe space to ask questions. We should all be here to learn and support each other without judgment. So don't be afraid to speak up, ask questions, or whatever you may want to throw into Discord. And our focus here is on malware communication methods because it's the common denominator in almost all malware. To function, malware must be able to communicate to the outside world. And this is where we can catch those communications when other internal protections may have failed. So Fawn,
yes.
data jitter is a great subject to shine a light on. It really is an innovative method being used by threat actors to avoid common detections. So I think it's good that we kind of throw some awareness on this. So I definitely appreciate you putting together what you did. So, take it away and drop some knowledge on us, dude.
Some serious knowledge bombs will do.
Yeah,
Thanks, Keith. Thanks for
yeah.
that lovely intro. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to number 2. And yeah, good to hang out with all of you again on Friday afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. And yeah, so I got something pretty cool planned for today, and we're going to discuss Merlin and data jitter, right?
And
And
Fawn,
so,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm interrupt you
yes,
right
go.
right now. So we do have a question do you have the slides available?
Yes, we can definitely make the slides available.
Okay,
Yeah,
see,
yes.
so as soon as we're done, we'll go ahead and throw those into the Discord, and you can
Yes.
find those under the ACM Webcast content channel, and that'll be shortly after the webcast.
Yeah, I'll do the last one as well, the Fiesta for you guys, because we didn't do it. So we'll drop both in there.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Thanks for the amazing question. So yeah, so we're going to discuss Merlin and data jitter. And just as was the case in the first webcast, we're not, the focus isn't on Merlin per se, but we're using Merlin as a like a test study, almost like a model species to help elucidate something else. So we're going to discuss data jitter, and also more fundamentally, what we're going to look at today is kind of the session size histogram, which is one of the core graphs available to you in AC Hunter for covert channel detection. All right. So just quickly, what are we going to cover today? So I'm just going to do a very quick recap. And the reason for this is it's been 5 weeks since we saw each other. So I want to run through some of the main takeaways from the previous one, because as well, today in many ways is just the continuation or extension of the first lesson. It directly builds on those concepts. So I think it's important for us to just quickly refresh our memories. And then we're going to look at the session size histogram. We're going to discuss Merlin and unpack data jitter. Here I'm going to show you really what it is, why people do it, and also how it works. Then I have a whole bunch of data sets, and we're going to look at different histograms from different types of histograms produced by malware and non-malware, and malware sending, downloading data, and malware using data jitter or not data jitter. And we're going to look at all these different histograms to really help us, to kind of prime us, to help us understand what we're looking for, and so that we can potentially spot malicious communication going ahead. I think that's kind of like, as people meeting here today, really with the aim of becoming better threat hunters. I think kind of like the real marrow of today is kind of like contained in that section, right? And then we'll just quickly summarize with a kind of take-home message. So let's do a quick recap. By the way, this is an actual photo of one of Keith's cats. Keith
Yeah.
got a lead scroll for it.
And I was going to say, Fawn, I think you purposely include this because you know it just freaks me out. So, but I do appreciate that it looks like you added a new feature. You put like an
Yes,
awesome grill on his choppers there. So,
yes. Thanks to Nano Banana, it made that. But yeah, I also am freaked out by it a bit, but I feel like, it keeps things zesty, so
yeah,
keeps the
thanks.
energy
I
up.
shall sleep well tonight. So, thank you.
Cool. So let's quickly recap what a histogram is very briefly. As I said, a histogram is a graph, and that graph, beyond the specifics, the essential thing it shows is always the exact same thing. On the x-axis, we have some property, and on the y-axis, we have how often that property appears in a sample, or frequency, right? Probably an easier way to put it. So let's just kind of jot our memory with a simple example. I showed you this image of individuals' heights, right? And we basically saw that we can take a histogram and we could put the heights on the bottom and the frequency, i.e. how many people are of that height in a population. And we can count individuals one by one, and then typically you'll get something like this. And since it forms kind of a parabolic shape, it is typically called the bell curve, also called normal distribution or Gaussian distribution. But I would say the colloquial term is bell curve. Typically stick with that because it looks kind of like the top of the bell, right? I know you got to squint, but more or less the tendency is there. So a C2 agent run loop, and when I say C2 agent run loop, I'm talking about the pattern exhibited by the communication between a C2 agent, which serves as a client, and the server. And as we saw then, and as we'll see now, it follows the classic request response cycle, something that's not unique to malware. That is how clients and servers typically communicate with one another. It always starts the same way. The agent, which is a client, right? The client always initiates communication. That's what makes it a client, is it initiates communication. It sends a request to the C2 server, and we typically call this the heartbeat or the check-in. And really what it is it's the agent saying to the server, hello, I'm here. Do you have a job for me, right? Now, there are a near infinite amount of ways you could actually actualize this from the attacker's point of view, but a very common way is just to use a get method or a head method. Gets more common because you don't need a data body, right? And all you have to do is hit a specific endpoint. So the server and the agent have an agreement. They know, hey, if the agent ever hits this specific endpoint using a get method, that is equal to the heartbeat, right?
Hey, Fawn.
Yes,
Hey,
brother.
just to add some clarity for
Yes.
maybe for some that may not understand the reason why. Um, why would the agent always have to initiate the connection?
Hmm.
Why couldn't the C2
Well,
server
or
just?
in Yes. So, it's important to keep in mind that the agent, as we're showing it here, that's typically on the target network, right? And the server is not, it's external, right? So the agent is communicating outbound because typically, unless it's severely misconfigured or for some strange reason, most corporate networks, the firewall is not going to allow inbound communication from a C2 or not even a C2 server. Right now, we're discussing HTTP or HTTPS, a random HTTP/S server to initiate communication inbound, right? That obviously represents a giant security risk. You can't just have random machines coming in and sending connections to machines on a corporate network. And so that's the main reason. There are ways to have some level of control on who gets to communicate outbound, but in general, you are going to need to allow systems on a corporate network to communicate outbound to HTTP, HTTPS servers, right? You would not know the IP of every single machine it would possibly want to talk to, so it does need to be more relaxed. You know, security is always a dynamic tension between keeping the machine safe, but also not impeding day-to-day operations, right? So
Yeah.
essentially.
Thank you, Fawn. I just
Cool.
thought that was important to add, because it's kind of an important
Uh,
component that,
yeah.
the internal agent, or you could even say the host that has been compromised, needs to be the one to initiate the conversation or the connection. So, in order
Yes.
to get through the protections. So, thank you.
Yeah, great reminder. Thanks for pointing that out, Keith. So after the request, it responds, the server responds, and it'll respond. It has a response body, so it has the ability now to actually embed some data. There's typically a JSON. One of the fields is going to be something like job, right? And it's a Boolean, and it can be true or false. Right? So it's just, do I have a job for you, or I don't have a job for you? And then if there is a job, there will be another field with what is the type of job, and probably another one with something like a byte array with the arguments, right? But in any case, in case there is a job, and only in case there is a job, there will be one more request response cycle that happens, right? So if true, only if true, another request is going to be sent. But remember now, let's say, for example, the server said, I want you to run some command. I want to know the host name. The agent runs a command. It gets the host name. It, encrypts it, puts it into a blob of data, and sends it back. So it now needs to use some method that allows for the inclusion of a data body, most commonly post. It can also be put or patch, but anything that allows it now to put that JSON blob in the body and send the results back to the server. Now it's kind of really done at this point, but to just complete this request response cycle, it would kind of be weird if the server just stayed quiet at this point. It typically sends back a 200 OK or 204 no content, which just acknowledges to the agent that it did receive its response, right? And then, as we said, typically some period of sleep takes place. And in most modern C2 frameworks now, you'll almost always have this be consisting of two components. It would be delay, which is some constant, let's say 30 seconds, and then jitter. And jitter is just a way to create some variance around that delay, around that constant. Now, there are many ways in which it can manifest. There's no rule here. It depends on the C2 framework. It can be, vary in milliseconds or seconds. It can be vary in percentage. It can be plus, it can be minus, it can be plus or minus. But at the end of the day, whatever the exact formula, the outcome is that you don't send the exact same sleep period every single time. Not sent, but the exact same constant sleep doesn't take place every time. There's some level of variation around that. And then we said that as well, another thing that can happen is right before the sleep takes place, the agent can intentionally disconnect, right? And so it breaks the connection between the agent and the server, and it sleeps. And then once it sends that first get, it will automatically create a new socket, i.e. create a new connection that underpins that new request, right? And so I want us just to think back to the histograms we spoke of in the previous one related to this C2 agent run loop. We said if there's no beaconing, it essentially just means there's one long connection. And you don't really have a histogram with one long connection because essentially it will just show one. And, if it was 24 hours, it'll be 24 hours. But it's senseless. It doesn't really help elucidate anything to us to look at a histogram of a long connection. Now we said if there is beaconing, but there's no jitter, we typically have a single bar. And I showed you guys this graph and I showed that, wow, we have so many different connections at exactly 30 seconds, but also good to know, good to be aware that networks are inherently messy. And so you do see a few kind of outliers, but overall, the vast majority, 99.9% of the connections happened at exactly 30 seconds. And then we said that if you use beacon and you add jitter now to create some variation, you'll create something like this. Now, I also just want to highlight that, I pointed out then that it's most often a bell curve. I believe I did mention in that webcast that it can be uniform as well, a uniform distribution. I've looked at many more data sets since then, and I would almost say that I would not make the claim anymore that a bell curve distribution is more common than uniform distribution, right? It really depends on the library and the mathematics that underpins that, but I want us to be less fixated about a bell curve per se and more about the fact that there's a minimum value, in this case 22, and a maximum value, in this case 30. And between those two values, there's kind of this equal distribution, right? Every value that can be occupied is occupied. This to me is more of a sign that something funky is going on than being obsessed with looking for a parabolic shape per se, right?
Yeah, and Fawn, because I've seen a lot of what you've seen as well. And what I've noticed is if it's programmed randomization, they're usually, or I would say almost always, some form of pattern. It almost seems like that when it comes to like computer, like with code randomization, you can't truly randomize. That for some reason, I think that's something you've noticed as well, right?
Um, yes, I mean, sure. There are many different ways to skin that cat. It depends
Yeah,
on the complexity, depends on the library they want to use.
yeah,
This is kind of a rabbit hole one can go down to.
yeah.
I don't see extremely complex implementations of this. I have experimented with it, like adding second order randomization and stuff in. And I think the reason it isn't heavily, you know, that there isn't a lot of complexity there in terms of what attackers create is perhaps that not a lot of people get caught on that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
because of that reason, it's kind of a evolve on a per need basis. And maybe if AC Hunter and Rita blow up and everyone uses it, and Jitter is one of the telltale signs, then they'll probably get smarter and innovate on that front, But I would certainly not say that it couldn't be done.
Um,
There's very little theoretically that couldn't be done with programming. It really just depends on the need,
I, I,
like what's driving
and I
that,
totally agree.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like it could be a rule because it can't be a rule because it's not 100%, but it's just what I've seen like in general,
Yeah.
just generalizing
Hmm.
that program randomization usually will show some form of pattern where it's not truly randomized,
Hmm.
like if I were to take a sheet of paper and just randomly draw things on there, I could
Hmm.
probably make it more randomized than a code or randomization could. I mean, it's just something I've kind of noticed. But like I said, it's not
We should set up a
100%.
webcast.
It's not a
We're gonna
rule.
blindfold you with a piece of paper and I'll write a program. And we can see
Yeah.
who can create the most randomized. Okay.
Well, that would
Heath
be fun.
versus machine.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, carry on. Thank you.
No worries. No. So that first histogram that I just showed, that was looking at, as we just saw, the duration that passes between subsequent connections. But then I don't know if you guys recall, those of you that were there, in AC Hunter, we have a second histogram, and that looks at the session size. And we saw this exact screenshot. I showed this kind of bar. And I showed there that, we also look at not only the time that passes between subsequent durations, but also how much data was transferred in a session, or not a session, but actually an individual connection. So just to make this clear and relate this to this kind of diagram that we're working with, I'm going to show you. So let's just kind of squish everything over to the side just to give more space. I'm just going to hide the server and the agent for now. And then I want to remind us that when the agent sends its initial request, of course, that it necessitates a connection, right? It can't just send a request if there isn't an underlying connection. But in most libraries, like if you use Go's net HTTP library to send a request, the library, or actually more accurately, the operating system, if it has the necessary permissions, it will create a socket, right? It will do the three-way handshake and set up that connection. Now, the three-way handshake symbolizes the start of our connection. And then there, when I say disconnect, when I say it intentionally disconnects, well, that's the four-way teardown, right? Your FINAX. And if we looked at Wireshark and we look at packets, we can see the three-way handshake, and we know that's where the connection starts. And we scroll down and we see the four-way teardown, and we know that's where the connection ends, right? So that red line now essentially represents our connection. So with the second histogram, session size, or how much data was transferred during the connection, what I essentially mean is in this red line, in those back and forths, how much data was being transferred back and forth between the agent and the server. Right? Now, again, if we didn't beacon, then we're going to ask how much data was transferred during the entire connection. But just as was the case with a long connection and the first histogram, we don't really care about that because if you have a one giant big one, that doesn't really tell us anything. That there's no information that can help us deduce whether or not we're dealing with malicious communication. So everything we're going to discuss now in terms of data jitter, we're really focused. We're assuming some kind of beaconing is taking place. So before we now move on into our new frontier, I just want to do a quick knowledge checkpoint. Let's just quickly summarize. AC Hunter has two core histograms. The first histogram looks at the connection time or connection duration, and it is the duration between individual connections. I want to be very clear here. I think it's important to understand, and I got so confused for so long about exactly what this means, but it's not the start of connection one to the start of connection two, right? It's not the delta column you see in Wireshark. It is the end of connection one and the start of connection two. And why is that? Well, we just saw what does that represent? The sleep time, which is sleep plus jitter, right? Because what we are measuring with that histogram is sleep and jitter. That's literally what we're looking at there. And then the histogram two, like I just said, is session size, and we're looking at the data transferred during a single connection. Cool. So let's talk quickly about Merlin and then about data jitter. Now, Merlin, just quickly, just so we kind of all orient ourselves what it is, but it's an open source C2 framework written in Go. It was released in 2017 by a guy named Russell Van Tile that goes by the moniker Neon Dog. Yeah, he's an employee at SpectreOps. And it's been linked to some APTs like Muddy Water and APT 41. So it's not just kind of a cool experimental thing. It definitely has some teeth and is used by threat actors in the wild as well. I'm going to go over some of its kind of, I would say, differentiating factors, its secret sauce, what makes it special. And as far as I know, it's the only framework that gives you an option over all three HTTP types, including HTTP3, which uses quick, obviously. It has a whole swath, a smorgasbord of different encoding types. Yeah, there's a big focus on the secure communication between the agent and the server when it comes to Merlin. He put a lot of effort and intention on that. So it uses opaque agent authentication and JWT for message authentication. And then one of the other things it has is data jitter. Now, data jitter, there are other frameworks that do it, but it actually isn't an incredibly common feature. And I want to mention here that I'm going to be calling it data jitter, sometimes also referred to as payload jitter. But in Merlin, in the documentation, if you read it, you won't see the mention of data jitter. He calls it padding. I don't like the term padding because to me, padding means something else kind of more general, right? The padding of a packet. But I just wanted to say that to be aware if you maybe want to go and experiment with Merlin and you're like, there's no mention of data jitter, it's because he refers to it as padding in the actual documentation and in the settings of the framework, right? So what is data jitter? Well, let's think of this, our classic diagram again, and let's think of quickly just that first step, just the first heartbeat, the check-in, right? Let's just kind of zoom in on that. And I want you to pay attention to the fact that it's get. And now with get, again, as I said, there's no data body, right? So unless you are inserting a randomized blob of data in one of the headers, which you could do, but which would be kind of a weird move, it's typically always the same size, right? Theoretically, you could change it, but it's almost always the exact same size. So check-in, always the same size. But now I want you to combine that with another fact, kind of truism, which is that the vast majority of the check-ins, the server will say, I don't have a job for you. Like the vast, vast majority. Even if things take place, we could say 90, 95, 98, 99% plus of the times, server will say, don't have a job for you, dude. go back to sleep, basically. So now let's look at our diagram. Now, if that second arrow says false, that of course means we don't perform the next set of request response, right? Because there's no job, there's no results to return. And so in other words, if we think about this, if the first connection is the same size, the request, if the response, I don't have a job, is the same size and nothing else happens, then obviously it means every single time this thing takes place, which again represents the vast majority of the interactions, it is going to produce the exact same size every single time, right?
And I'd just like to jump in on that.
Yes, of course,
That
brother.
to kind of just put in some context of why we're even talking about this is like you just described is if the payload is the same exact size, the data size is the same going back and forth. That's something that actually can be keyed upon with security protection software. They're looking for those type of communications that repeatedly have the same size of data. So that's exactly why, like a threat actor would want to use data jitter, is to avoid that type of detection. So,
Perfect. Spot on, brother. And so let's recall quickly, we've seen this now a few times, but remember histogram one, the connection duration. If we had a beacon with no jitter, right? It means the duration is always the same. And we saw if it's 30 seconds, we're going to have one giant bar. But now logically, okay, we're measuring something else, but I'm essentially describing the exact same thing here, right? That every single time, or the vast majority of times, the session size is going to be the exact same. So that just means we're going to have one big bar now. And from the threat actor's point of view, it's the same problem as not using jitter, which is very easy to detect. And as Keith said, this is definitely, I can't speak to many other software, but with AC Hunter and our training and how we advise you use it, it's definitely, there's a good reason this is one of the two histograms we provide you with is we want to be on the lookout for these kind of things, right? One big bar that represents the heartbeat, basically. So just to kind of summarize, so just as jitter introduced some variation in terms of the duration between connections, just so data jitter introduces variation in terms of the data transferred in a session. Right? So how does it do this? I always like, even though we're attack defenders, and this is more explaining how it's happening from the attacker's point of view, I always love to understand what we're looking at, right? So we're just going to do a quick high-level overview of how does it actually happen. So if we once again look at this and we say there's no job, it's false. But now at the top, right, we said typically get, but imagine instead of get, we use post. So why would we use post? Because post gives us a data body, right? So now it gives us this blue square, which is our data body, and we have a JSON. It could probably have a few fields in there, but one of them we can call padding, and it's a byte slice or a byte array. And then let's say we choose a value of 2048 bytes. Now what'll happen is every single round, remember just as with time, every time Jitter calculates a random amount to add or subtract, every time between 0 to 2048 is going to choose a random amount of junk data. It's going to generate random junk data and it's just going to put it inside of the byte slice, which is just going to mean that every single time the size of the packet is going to randomly vary.
hey,
Cool.
Ron, I have a
Yes.
couple of questions.
Yes, let's
Uh,
do it. This is a
First is
good
from
good
Herman,
question point.
and
Yes.
yeah, and actually it's perfect timing. That way I can look at this creepy creature this whole time.
Hmm.
But
I'm
Herman
gonna
has,
make a doll for you. We're gonna send it to your house. You can
uh,
be in the corner next to your bed, dude,
oh, great. Thank you. I
watching
appreciate
over
that.
you.
Yeah, make sure you send it COD as well. Hey, hey, Herman has a question. He says,
Yes,
could we have a response jitter? And he says, by that, I mean the request and response being slightly varied with some encoding or other means.
absolutely. Right. I don't know if it would, if we are looking at the session size and bidirectional, I don't know if it would confer a necessary advantage, but absolutely. The response body has a data body, right? So no reason you can have an extra field there. And in fact, I haven't actually looked into it a lot, but I'm pretty sure from what I read, that's what Cobalt Strike does. Cobalt Strike was very late to introduce data jitter. But as I understood from the documentation, and again, I looked into this one day a few months ago, it seemed like it was the response actually that had the variation introduced. So yes, great
Awesome.
question, Herman.
Thank you. And then Brian's asking, he's saying, so if I set up my C2 to have a certain size every time, how many times could it be padding and others could be exfil of data? Not sure I fully understand what he's asking.
So the exfil of, yeah, I don't 100% understand, Brian, but maybe if we could just go back here quickly. I want you to remember that the actual exfil will only happen here, right? Because how does the agent know it needs to exfil data if it wasn't given a job, right? So that will only happen if here it says, I have a job for you, download this file, which means this happens. But now remember, the jobs are going to have different size, just unless by chance they don't, right? So having jobs almost inherently introduces some variation. But what we're concerned about is not necessarily in the instances that there was a job. What we're interested in is in this case, because as I showed in this case, typically this is the exact same size. This is the exact same size. So here in those cases where data is not being exfilled, which again would typically represent the vast majority of times, in those instances, that's where it's going to be the same size every single time. So I hope I understood and kind of answered it. And if I didn't,
Well,
please feel free to ask for
and in the
clarification.
meantime, Fawn, he's
Yeah.
clarifying his question. He's saying that how would you know whether it was padding or data being exfiltrated out? If and he's saying that if not all the packets are the same or similar size.
Well, you wouldn't because
Yeah.
unless you're able to break the encryption, which you shouldn't do. I'm assuming we're talking about HTTPS here. And remember, even when threat actors use HTTP, they'll typically encrypt. They just encrypt on layer 7 and then put it in. They're never going to send what they're doing in the clear, right? So you won't. There's no real way. So, very often as attackers, defenders, we can't see the direct evidence, but we can see like the second order evidence, right? So we're more looking for the telltale signs that a data jitter was being used, and that's going to come now in the next section when we look at histograms. So I can't tell you this packet had exfil or this packet had data jitter, but what I can tell you is I can look at a whole session and I can tell you data jitter was probably being used here. Yeah.
Oh, great answer. Thank you, Fawn.
Cool, cool. Any other questions?
Not that I can see. No.
Cool. But keep them coming, guys, and thanks for the great questions. Yeah, it's awesome for us to help us clarify ourselves, right? So let's compare histograms. And there's four different types I want to compare, and it is when we use the C2 and there is no data transfer, there was no exfil. When there was exfil taking place, when there was payload jitter, and then what normal traffic looks like, right? Yeah, so we're gonna kind of like a caveat. We're gonna look at real data now, guys, and we're gonna see, what do we expect from first order principles and the ideas, and then again, real data is often a little bit messier, but we can sometimes even it doesn't conform necessarily exactly to our expectations. We can often still see some general sense of a pattern, right? And that's really what we're after when doing kind of network threat hunting, when looking at network communication, right? So let's look at no data transfer. And, we've kind of already primed ourselves for this. But here was the very interesting thing when I created these slides. The framework I've created the most data sets on for this is Cobalt Strike. It's been a while ago, but I have many, many different data sets. And as I just described from the heartbeat, it should always be the exact same size, right? The get and the response. So as that other diagram I showed you, I was expecting to come here and always see one big bar, right? And it was a good reminder for myself too. is that, you know, in terms of the execution of the scientific method is don't come with your preconceived notions of what the data is going to show, right? So the interesting thing was there was a giant preamble and basically hedging just to show that every single Cobalt Strike data that I looked at had two values. And the interesting thing was that it was always in every single data set, I looked at about eight of them. It was at 767 and 807. So exactly a 40 by discrepancy. And it was always more or less roughly in a ratio of about 3 to 1, right? So again, I'm going to show a few more data sets, but we're going to see the same essential thing is I changed the delay here and the jitter here. The amount of packets changed, but again, 767, 807, almost 3 to 1, right? Again, just changing our delay, the jitter now 0, 3.23 to 1, but again, 767 to 807. And one more time, the fourth one I'm going to show you just to like really hammer the point home, but I saw every time 767 to 807, 3 to 1. Now, the main thing is that I was teaching last week. I was preparing the slides this week. So I didn't have the time to really go in and dig in and try and understand what is causing this discrepancy. And I would love to do that. But I think actually the cool thing about this is that it is such an incredibly specific pattern 767 807 that this is to me immediately when I see this something that immediately shouts like a potential signature, right? If you see some communication that has bars at 767 and 807 in roughly a 3 to 1 ratio, I can't imagine that something else produces that. Now, again, maybe if I change some other settings on Cobalt Strike, this could change up. It could very well happen. You know, when you do produce different data sets, you know, according to the scientific method, you typically only want to change one variable at a time. So for most of these, everything was fixed. I would just change like delay or jitter. But let's say I made more dramatic changes, perhaps the outcome would be slightly different. But from all the data sets that I have created with Cobalt Strike, this was always the case, you know, our kind of heartbeats, right? So I also just want us to kind of think just of no data transfer in general. And like that first graph I showed, and as other graphs that I've seen, and certainly Keith has been seen too, and I'm sure many of you, um, typically a heartbeat means we have one small amount, you know, because it's basically a get and the small response. And it is a very, very large, very, very high frequency of that small amount. Even the one that I just showed, 767 and 807, they're 40 bytes. In one way, they're 2 pixels, but if you zoom out enough, those 2 pixels can almost just like, you can almost just like merge them, right? If our timeline, if our x-axis is big enough. So at the end of the day, this is, I like showing you guys this and how it's messy and things are a little bit different. But I think despite this, the generalized pattern, the generalized idea that a high concentration of the vast majority of the connections happen at some small amount, whether it's one or two, holds true. And that is C2 heartbeat without any data jitter and now without any data being transferred, right? These were 24-hour PCAPs that just ask, do I have a job for you? No, I don't, right? And so the second one is with data transfer. And I used Adaptix for this. I did it this week. And here you can essentially see the same idea. We have a heartbeat, which is one really big bar. And then what I found interesting here is I downloaded a bunch of big dummy files one by one, 4 of them. And it's clear to me that it didn't chunk the files, right? And what I mean by that is some of the files were a few hundred megs, but when I said download this file, it kept the connection open until the file was completely downloaded, right? I was expecting again that it would probably download a bit, kill the connection, continue, kill the connection, continue, something like that, chunking it. And perhaps other frameworks would do that. Again, I didn't have time to explore more, but the general idea here, again, whether it actually chunks or not, is you're going to see the same sort of pattern, which is you will still see a heartbeat because data jitter has not been introduced. But in addition to the heartbeat, you're going to see a few little stragglers that are bigger, right? Again, even if it was chunked, it would still be bigger than the heartbeat. It might be a little bit higher, but it would still kind of be on the right. Our transfers would be like these little ones and twos, like kind of off there somewhere. Cool. So now let's think about payload jitter. So man, this, like I said, looking at these data sets was extremely interesting because a lot of follow-up questions came. But so the main one I use obviously is Merlin, right, in the title of today's talk. And we're going to look at three data sets. And every single one did the same thing, was it actually still kept a pretty pronounced heartbeat, which was surprising to me because the whole idea really of data jitter is to kind of wipe out your heartbeat and spread it out. But all of them did this. It was kind of still quite a lot of connections here, and then many connections spread out over a continuous range, right? So I'm just varying the values somewhat, but you're going to see this same pattern play out, kind of like pronounced heartbeat-ish or heartbeat region at least, spread out. And the same thing, again, heartbeat region, continuous range, and spread out. And for me, what was interesting about this is, sorry, what's interesting about this is not even necessarily that there was still something like a heartbeat, but with data jitter, the real telltale sign and the thing you won't see anywhere else, which to me almost makes data jitter the most conspicuous histogram of all of them, is you see this continuity. You see this continuous range, right? And we can even think about how jitter takes place in timing, right? I showed the 22 to 30. It's randomly choosing amounts, and more or less it's gonna land on every single variation it can, right? Just by chance, just by rolling the die. If you roll a six-sided die enough times, it's gonna be the same amount across the six, right? And so every single time it kind of created this continuous range. But I wasn't satisfied. I was like, why is this taking place? I tried to look at the libraries. I couldn't tell. I actually connected with the guy a few months ago on, he's works for Spectre Ops, so they have a Bloodhound Slack channel. He's there. I asked him. He didn't know either why it was doing this. But I actually then just recreated this with my own C2 framework, which is called Numenon, which also can do data jitter. And I got the results last night, and this was very interesting because here is almost like a cleaner spread between the range. But for some reason, it also had this one value that it decided it really liked it about 10 times as much as the other values. But again, the point remains for me here is I don't really care about these few bars, whether it's in the beginning or in the middle. What stands out to me here, and again, what I'm telling you guys now is what you will almost never see being produced unless it's being manipulated, is this continuous range. We don't see any gaps there. We don't see clusters. We just see one after the other has some kind of value. That to me is incredibly suspicious when I look at it, right?
Hey, Vaughn. Hey,
Yes.
I just want to add a comment from Linux Girl because I think it's a good one.
Yes.
And I think it would add
Yes.
clarity for anyone else that may be looking at this and wondering as well. Is she's was asking so that each bar is representing a data transfer, right? Which is correct.
No. So we have to think
Well,
again about, oh, sorry, about what a histogram is, right? Why? Sorry, I don't know why I did that. Sorry, guys. So if I'm just gonna get back to kind of Numenon and use that as an example. Okay, so this is frequency and this is size. So let's say this is 750, right? And I don't know what this amount is. Let's just say for the sake of argument, it's about 10. It means there were 10 connections, which the bidirectional data transfer between the agent and the server was exactly 750. So yes, X represents the size. I'm sorry, maybe that is what you asked.
yeah.
But so X represents the size of the connection, and then obviously Y represents the amount of times in the PCAP, in the trace file, that exact same size was observed.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
she was thinking correctly. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
I just wanted to bring it up as well in case anyone else may be confused about what we're looking at. But
Awesome.
each bar is representing not only the size of the data transferred, but the frequency or how many times it
Yes.
happened. So, yeah.
Yes, and as a good reminder to ourselves, that's what a histogram is always going to show. We're going to have some property and we're going to have the frequency of that property, right? And in this
Yeah.
case, we're interested in the one connection, the amount of data that was exchanged.
Yep. And great question, Linux Girl. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Linux girl. She's always got the good ones. And now normal traffic, and this is the only one I'm going to have a little bit of a, explainer beforehand because what does normal traffic mean? Actually, it's obviously extremely varied, right? Non-malicious traffic. Can we look for a pattern? And what I'm actually going to say is here, the lack of a pattern is the pattern. Okay. So this is maybe not going to sound like it makes a lot of sense. Let's just look at a few examples and kind of see what I'm trying to get at, right? And so, this is to Microsoft, and we just see a few bars scattered about. Again, there's not one big one in the beginning, there's not a continuous range, it's just kind of helter-skelter. And we can look at variety, and that doesn't look like the first one, but again, it doesn't really have any distinct pattern, right? Same thing, little cluster, one and two there. Doesn't really have any kind of shape to it. And once again, same thing, right? So normal traffic in general, again, guys, I don't want these aren't signatures, right? They're not precise. We're not looking for a specific sequence of bytes. We're looking for ideas, general patterns, so that when we're looking at data, we at least have some sense of what we're looking at, right? But nothing here can ever say, oh, it's a cluster, it's definitely normal, or it's definitely malicious or anything like that, right? We're looking for tendencies, for like archetypes or something like that. And so just again to remind ourselves, what did this look like? It was just kind of none of them looked the same, but none of them again had some kind of pattern that we can pick out. That if we look at the same normal traffic over and over, we can start seeing some kind of tendency. That doesn't, the lack of the tendency, the lack of the pattern is the pattern, right? And so let's just quickly recap and remind ourselves, because as I said in the intro, I think this is the main kind of takeaway I'd like you guys as a network threat hunter to take away from here. This is the most pragmatic stuff, is your ability now to look at the second histogram with, again, not hard rules, not black and white rules, but the ability to distinguish between different shades of gray and make you think about whether or not it's worth pursuing something further or not, right? So with no data transfer and C2, no data jitter, we saw prominent heartbeats. One big bar in a small amounts, right? With data transfer, we also see a prominent heartbeat, right? But we see a few outliers. The outliers again represents those connections where data was actually being transferred. So with payload jitter, for me, honestly, I think payload jitter is more suspicious than not using payload jitter, unless people start using payload jitter differently. But the continuous, I have seen things that look like heartbeats and heartbeats with a few outliers in normal traffic, where it's kind of like touch and go. But I have never seen anything like payload jitter in normal traffic, where it's a continuous range, right? So definite red flag. And then normal traffic again, kind of cluster, helter skelter, a little bit here, a little bit there, kind of thing. So just to give you guys some references, and by the way, Keith has got both the links ready. So that is the original malware of the day one that I did with Merlin C2 data jitter. If you wanted to go get the trace file, the Zeek logs, and go look at it yourself. And then as a follow-up, I did a non-malware of the day blog post. And I tried to kind of like just have fun and define this thing called RCR, which I named range coverage ratio. It's a Python script I cobbled together in the afternoon. It's 100% not something that you can use in production. But I think there's a lot of value at looking at the article, because it goes to the thought process of saying like, okay, how, if we see there's this like continuous range for payload jitter, and we know if there isn't payload jitter, that typically doesn't exist. How can we start thinking about quantifying that to use that as a potential measurement to look for situations where the data, the packet size or the session size has deliberately been manipulated, right? So it's something, again, it's not something you want to put in production, but it's an article that I actually like. It's close to my heart because I think the meta there is cool to start thinking about how do you, how can you go ahead and think about creating your own applications or scripts to start detecting certain things, right? And so now we can just kind of summarize with our take-home message. And the take-home message is this. So AC Hunter has two core histograms. The first one, we look at the duration between connections. And the second one, we look at the data that was transferred in a single connection. And both of them will produce distinct patterns if no variation is introduced. If there's no jitter, if there's no data jitter, we're going to see one big bar, right? And specifically the session size, there is now this technique that attackers can use called data jitter or payload jitter or padding to create, to add random junk data to create some variation. So data jitter succeeds somewhat at removing the heartbeat. I showed you guys with Merlin. It didn't really with my framework. It does, but it produces not a heartbeat, but something else. So, kind of take that with a little bit of an asterisk. Um, but at the end of the day, it produces a continuous range, which is itself extremely suspicious, right? So I think that's the summary, the thing I want you guys to remember, and especially about the continuous range and being on the lookout for that when you do your own threat hunting using AC Hunter. Um, so just one last thing before this is done. Um, for malware of the day, I want to put a call out to the community. I want to ask any of you, we're looking for C2 and rats and backdoors and covert channels that are more in vogue, meaning more in the news recently. I have so many things that are going on. As much as I would like to read every single article each day, I just can't keep up with all of it. So if any of you come across an interesting article of something that's happened recently that you would like to see featured in Malware of the Day, please feel free to connect DM me on Discord, fawn.ross, or fawn@activecountermeasures.com, and share it with me. And yeah, we'd be happy to kind of harness the collective eyes and and it'd be cool too. We can do shout out and stuff if we feature your suggestion. So with that, Keith and I want to thank you. And Keith is on the right, by the way. Keith is Pedro. Vote for Keith, guys.
Oh man.
And and with that, I'm super happy to take any questions.
Actually, years ago, I had such long hair. I kind of, in the dark frame glasses, I looked a little more like Garth from Wayne's World, but,
Oh yeah. Well, that's a good person to look like.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just kind of just to add my own little commentary here is
Yes,
that
please.
what we're discussing here is as far as data jitter. This is a threat hunter. This is one component of
Mhm.
researching a potential threat, right? And the reason we're talking about this and how this really even came about as far as potential threats is threat actors will always evolve whenever they get caught, right? So security protection software is designed to look for certain values, parameters, or certain methods within traffic communications and trigger on that, right? So let's just say, for an example, if you had in your environment, you had software that was looking for very rigid beacon activity or maybe certain FQDNs as destinations or so forth, and it triggers on that traffic. Um, what the threat actors have found is well, they're not looking at the data jitter. They're looking specifically for very rigid, continuous data streams, right? That are all the same size. And that what they found is that if they were to like what Fawn just described is if they were to jitter their data and it gets them past those certain protections, So that's why this is all happening in the first place, right? This is just a big arms race, really, against us, the good guys, and the bad guys are trying to attack networks. So that's like specifically why we're talking about this. But it's just a component of the traffic. It's, so in other words, as a threat hunter, you couldn't just, okay, I'm just going to purely look for data jitter. There's going to be other components in that traffic, like the beaconing activity, like Fawn was talking about, which is the timing of the connections, or the destination itself. Where is it going to? Is it
Yeah.
legitimate? Does it make sense? And even if it does make sense, let's say it's going to a CDN, like it's going to somewhere like Cloudflare or Amazon, it looks legitimate. But yet you look at all the different parameters of that traffic, like the data size and if it's beaconing or the timing between connections, it needs more of a holistic view. So what we're talking about is one component of that. So just to make that clear.
Yeah, 100%. Great point, Keith. Yes, and of course, and I would say just kind of in general, and what to me, a threat hunter's mindset is like, I really think of it as being a detective, right? And
Yep.
it is so rare that you just find one clue, especially on the network, that's like, oh my God, 100%, ring the bell. We got ourselves, a compromise here, bring in the cavalry and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You want to look at multiple things, and I think as Keith said to me, the kind of essential components is, look at the timing, look at the second histogram, the session size, definitely look at the host reputation, all of that. CDNs are a little bit harder, obviously, but the thing is about a CDN is from the attacker's point of view, it's also not an incredibly straightforward, right? They do need a domain with some reputation and some history, and I listened to a talk recently of Kyle Avery, who's now at Outflank. He was before at BHIS, and he said, most CDNs have become extremely good at picking up malicious communication coming from one of their machines, and they might not block you on day one, but at some point they're gonna kind of investigate and figure something out. So from the attacker's point of view, CDNs aren't super viable for extremely long-running operations either. Maybe a few days or a few weeks, but if it stretches into weeks and months, at one point they don't want to just wake up one morning and their infrastructure is wiped, right? That is like a disaster. And then the fourth component for me always is, and I know we don't speak about it that much, and it's definitely something at some point that'll feature, but it is looking at the process. It's, network for breadth, endpoint for depth. Obviously, the endpoint, looking at the process, it's a whole entire world. That's kind of like what the DFIR people are specialists of. But really, as a threat hunter, and even if you're a network threat hunter, there are just a few basic things. You can use something like Process Hacker or System Informer to just look at a few key details. Where was it run from? What were the command line parameters? What is the PID, the parent's process ID? Does it have a valid signature, etc.? And just a handful of things that you can go and look at that can immediately help build. Like I said, you're a detective, you're building a case. You want to go look at a lot of different things to kind of build it together. And another thing is what I wanted to say is about today, Merlin and data jitter was the kind of the focus, but my intention was really to use that as a vehicle for us more to have a discussion about the second histogram, right? Last week was a big discussion on the first histogram. Now we've had a fairly big discussion on the second histogram. And when you're using AC Hunter, these are two of your most important tools that you're going to be using, right? So I hope if I succeeded, then today you won't just be able to try to find data jitter in the second histogram, but I want you to be more comfortable with the second histogram to understand fundamentally what is it looking at, or what is it showing, and if you see different things, to be able to interpret it and to see maybe heartbeat with data transfer, things like that. Not necessarily just data jitter per se, right? But I would say if you guys are able to hunt out data jitter, you're among a chosen few. There aren't many people that have that skill in their back pocket. So yeah.
Those are great points, Fawn. Because I totally
Thanks,
agree. I
brother.
mean, in fact, we're kind of saying a lot of the same things in different
One.
ways, but you're completely right. Like as far as threat hunting, looking for malicious traffic, it's usually hardly ever just one thing. It's the whole picture. So if you're looking at some malicious traffic that has like beaconing activity, and maybe you see some strange data transfers, data jitter, and but yet the destination is going to Microsoft, and you're, oh yeah, it's fine, it's going to Microsoft. It's not the one component. You need to look at everything together. And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, it's going to a destination that seems legitimate, but yet why am I seeing these patterns that look suspicious? So,
Mhm.
like you said, it really is. You are an investigator and need to look at all the different components, not just rely on one or even two. You need to look at everything. So, thank you, Fawn. And also,
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Fawn, if you could
Yes.
look at Yashil's last comment in Discord.
Yeah, I was just reading it. I'm having a hard time interpreting it. Do you
Well,
understand exactly what it
I was
means?
struggling a bit myself.
So
Yashil, if you want
histogram
to
to data in
try
a
to
single
clarify
session
exactly,
from corresponds to for any given scenario.
yeah, we were having trouble understanding exactly what you're asking.
Yeah, sorry, it's us, it's not you. But maybe if you could just break down the question in small, because you're adding a lot of qualifiers there, which is kind of like convoluting. I'm not sure what the exact kind of like meat of the question is. If maybe you could just kind of clarify that, and we
Yeah,
can take it from there, you know. So,
excellent.
sorry
Yeah,
about that, Yashil.
we definitely want to
Yeah.
address and answer your question. So, uh, but we are actually running out of time, so we can continue that on Discord, Yashil, if you want to
Yes.
expand on that. We'd be happy to.
So Yashil, this is me. Just send me a DM,
Yeah.
and I'm super happy to chat with you some more. But
Awesome. Well,
yeah,
thank you,
thanks
Fawn. That
everyone.
was
Yeah.
another great presentation. I want to thank you, Fawn, for you always put together great presentations, great slides. I enjoyed it myself. Hopefully, everyone that attended have enjoyed this as well. Uh, we both love doing this, so
Yeah.
we hope you enjoy it and get some value out of it as well. And I got to just say, happy hunting.
Happy hunting. Oh, you've got a signature sign off now, Keith. I have to
Yeah,
get one too
yeah,
now. Friends, I also just want to quickly mention, sorry, it was 5 weeks since our last one. We'll now do it on a regular 4 week cycle. We had a lot of stuff going on last week. Yeah, so we just want to create a more kind of continuous kind of groove and pattern with you guys. So yeah, we enjoy it and we're looking forward to the next one. Thanks Viper Nihil, thanks Buzz, thanks
yeah.
Herman,
Thank you all.
Rodrilia, Brian, Samson. Thanks everyone. We appreciate your time and your presence, and we hope you have a great Friday and a lovely weekend.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you all. Thank you,
Enjoy the
Fawn.
rugby, Brian. Best of luck. Bye everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Recording
Bye, everyone.
stopped.